The cobblestone streets of Paris, usually bustling with life, now echoed with a chilling silence. A cold, damp wind, heavy with the scent of rain and distant fear, swept through the narrow alleys, rustling the few withered leaves still clinging to the bare trees. It was the winter of 1943, and the city, once a beacon of art and romance, lay under the oppressive shadow of occupation. Food was scarce, spirits were low, and hope, a flickering ember, struggled to survive. Amélie Dubois, a woman whose gentle eyes belied a fierce resilience, pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her as she hurried through a deserted marketplace. Her breath plumed in the frigid air, and the gnawing emptiness in her stomach was a constant companion. She was on her way to the soup kitchen, where she volunteered what little time and energy she had, finding solace in helping others in a world that offered so little. Amélie had lost her own family early in the war, victims of an indiscriminate bombing raid, and the void they left propelled her to offer comfort where she could. She believed that even in the darkest of times, humanity's light could still shine through acts of kindness. As she rounded a corner into a particularly grimy alley, a faint whimper caught her ear. It was a sound so small, so fragile, that at first she thought it was merely the wind. But then it came again, clearer this time, tinged with a raw vulnerability that tugged at her heart. Cautiously, Amélie stepped deeper into the shadows, her worn shoes scuffing on the uneven pavement. Tucked beneath an overflowing dumpster, a tiny huddle of rags stirred. It was a boy no older than 5, curled into a ball, his thin frame shivering violently. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, and his eyes, wide and terrified, stared up at her like those of a cornered animal. He clutched a tattered, muddy teddy bear to his chest, his only apparent possession. Amélie's heart onched. He was clearly an orphan, one of the countless children displaced and forgotten by the war. She knelt slowly, careful not to startle him, her voice soft and reassuring. "Bonjour, petit. Are you alone?" The boy only whimpered again, his small body trembling uncontrollably. His lips were chapped and blue, and a hacking cough racked his small frame. He was clearly ill, and the biting cold of the alley would only worsen his condition. Amélie knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she couldn't leave him there. He was a child, a human being in desperate need, and her empathy, a quality she clung to fiercely, wouldn't allow it. Without another thought, she reached out a gloved hand, her touch hesitant but firm. "Come with me, little one. I'll take care of you." The boy flinched, but then, slowly, tentatively, he unwound himself from his protective ball and reached for her hand. His fingers were icy cold, but the grip, though weak, was surprisingly strong. As Amélie helped him to his feet, she noticed a small, intricately carved wooden bird clutched in his other hand, almost hidden by his sleeve. It looked out of place, too finely made for the grime and despair of the alley. She didn't dwell on it, her immediate concern being the boy's welfare. She simply held his small hand in hers, leading him out of the shadows and towards the faint promise of warmth and safety, wondering what kind of cruel fate had led this innocent child to such a desperate state. He was a war orphan, just like so many others, an unwanted burden in a world consumed by conflict. Or so she thought. If you've enjoyed this first glimpse into Amélie and the young boy's journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more chapters of The Unwanted Heir. Amélie led the boy through the darkening streets, a silent, fragile connection forming between them. The wind had picked up, and a fine drizzle began to fall, turning the already slick cobblestones treacherous. She pulled him closer, trying to shield his small body from the elements. His cough was more persistent now, a dry, rasping sound that worried her deeply. He still hadn't spoken a word, his large, wary eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, a silent testament to the fear he must have endured. They arrived at Amélie's small apartment building, a modest structure tucked away in a quieter residential district. The building itself showed the wear and tear of wartime neglect, with peeling paint and chipped windows, but inside, her tiny flat was a haven of order and cleanliness. It was sparsely furnished, a reflection of her humble means, but what it lacked in luxury, it made up for in warmth. The small coal stove in the corner radiated a comforting heat, and the aroma of stale bread and weak tea lingered in the air. She helped the boy shed his soaking, threadbare clothes, revealing a body too thin, marked by bruises and grime. His hair was a tangled mess of dirty blonde, and beneath the layers of dirt, his skin was pale, almost translucent. As she gently washed his face with a warm, damp cloth, she noticed a delicate scar, almost imperceptible, just beneath his left eye. It looked old, a faint line that hinted at a past wound. He flinched at her touch at first, but then leaned into it, a silent acceptance. Amélie offered him a bowl of thin vegetable broth, the best she could manage with her meager rations. He ate slowly, deliberately, as if each spoonful was precious, his eyes never leaving hers. After he had eaten, she wrapped him in a coarse wool blanket and settled him on her small, worn sofa. He seemed to shrink into the fabric, a tiny island of vulnerability in the quiet room. Amélie sat beside him, watching his labored breathing. "What is your name, Petit?" she whispered, hoping to coax a sound from him. He blinked, his gaze distant, and then, almost imperceptibly, he pointed a small finger at the wooden bird clutched in his hand. Amélie carefully took the carving. It was beautifully crafted, the wood smooth and warm under her fingers, intricately detailed to resemble a soaring falcon. There was an engraving on the base, tiny, almost invisible, unless one knew to look for it. A crest, a shield with a stylized lion rampant. It meant nothing to her, just an elegant design. She returned the bird to him, and he clutched it fiercely. "A beautiful bird," she murmured. "Did someone give this to you?" He nodded, a tiny flicker of memory in his eyes. He still wouldn't speak. Amélie sighed softly, knowing it would take time. The war had taken so much, including the voices of so many children. She tucked him in, promising him a safe night's sleep, a luxury many in Paris no longer knew. As she watched him drift into an exhausted slumber, a sense of purpose, stronger than she had felt in years, settled over her. She would protect this child, this forgotten orphan, no matter the cost. Days turned into a week, then 2. The boy, whom Amélie affectionately began calling Petit Oiseau, little bird, because of his treasured wooden carving, slowly started to mend. His cough lessened, his color improved, and the haunted look in his eyes softened, replaced by a cautious curiosity. He still rarely spoke, communicating mostly through gestures and soft sounds, but he followed Amélie everywhere, a small shadow of unwavering trust. Amélie spent her days caring for him, rationing her meager food supplies even more strictly, often going hungry herself so he could eat. She read to him from old, tattered storybooks, her voice a comforting lullaby in the quiet apartment. She taught him simple songs, and though he wouldn't sing aloud, his lips would move silently, tracing the words. The wooden bird remained his constant companion, always held close. One blustery afternoon, as the wind howled outside, rattling the windows, Petit Oiseau was drawing with a piece of charcoal on a scrap of brown paper. He had drawn a large house, grand and sprawling, unlike any he could have seen in occupied Paris. And then, slowly, deliberately, he drew a small figure beside it, a woman with long, flowing hair. He looked up at Amélie, his blue eyes earnest. "Mama," he whispered, the first clear word he had uttered. Amélie's heart leaped. "Your mama?" she asked gently. He nodded, pointing to the drawing. Then, with painstaking effort, he scratched letters beneath the drawing of the house. K-A-R-L. He looked up at her expectantly. "Karl," he repeated, his voice still soft but stronger. Amélie's breath hitched. Karl, a German name. Her mind raced. Many people with German names resided in France before the war, some even French citizens, but in this climate, it was dangerous. And the drawing of the grand house, the finely carved bird, it all pointed to a life far removed from the impoverished streets. She smiled, masking her growing concern. "Karl," she repeated, testing the name. "It's a good name, Karl." She decided then that Karl's German name, and whatever life he might have come from, needed to remain a secret. In a city where suspicion festered and allegiances were constantly questioned, a German name, especially for a child, could invite dangerous scrutiny from both the occupation forces and the French resistance. She vowed to protect his identity, to ensure his safety above all else. Karl, meanwhile, seemed to sense the shift, the unspoken understanding between them. He looked at her with an innocent trust that made her resolve even stronger. He was hers now, her responsibility, and she would guard him fiercely from the harsh realities of their world. As weeks turned into months, Karl, slowly but surely, began to heal. Not just physically, but emotionally. His small cough was gone, replaced by a lively energy that filled Amélie's quiet apartment with a much-needed light. He still spoke sparingly, but his vocabulary grew, and he would often babble happily to his wooden bird. He called Amélie Maman Amélie, a title that warmed her heart more than she could express. Their lives settled into a fragile routine, a rhythm dictated by the scarcity of food, the omnipresent curfew, and the constant fear of arbitrary arrests. One crisp spring morning, Amélie decided to take Karl to a small, hidden park she knew, a forgotten patch of green space behind an old church, relatively safe from patrolling soldiers. The trees were just beginning to bud, a hopeful sign amidst the desolation. Karl, bundled in a coat Amélie had painstakingly altered for him, chased pigeons, his laughter echoing softly in the stillness. Amélie watched him, a rare smile gracing her lips, feeling a fleeting sense of normalcy. Suddenly, a group of soldiers marched past the entrance of the park, their boots thudding in unison on the cobblestones. Karl froze, his small body tensing. His laughter died on his lips, replaced by a look of pure terror, his eyes wide and vacant, as if he were seeing a ghost. He dropped his wooden bird, which clattered to the ground, and began to hyperventilate, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He clutched at Amélie's leg, burying his face in her skirt, trembling uncontrollably. Amélie quickly scooped him up, holding him tight, whispering reassurances. His small heart hammered against her chest. She remembered the day she found him, the fear in his eyes. This was different, more intense, a deep-seated trauma resurfacing. She managed to calm him, carrying him quickly out of the park and back to the relative safety of their apartment. Once inside, she sat him on the sofa, still trembling. He pointed a shaky finger at his wooden bird, now lying on the floor where he had dropped it. "No, not take," he choked out, his voice hoarse with fear. "Papa, gone. Mama, gone. Only bird." Amélie picked up the bird, her fingers tracing the intricate carving. The crest on its base seemed to pulse with a silent story. It was clear now that the soldiers, or perhaps something associated with them, were a trigger for him, connected to the loss of his parents. The fear in his eyes was not just the general fear of the occupation, but a specific, agonizing memory. She realized that Karl was not just an orphan of war. He was an orphan of a specific traumatic event, one that involved a deep personal loss connected to the presence of authority figures. The wooden bird, so carefully made, and his fragmented words about his parents hinted at a past far more complex and perhaps dangerous than she had initially imagined. She hugged him closer, her resolve hardening. She would protect him from these memories, from the shadows that haunted his small life. If you're captivated by Amélie and Karl's unfolding story and want to see what happens next, remember to subscribe to the channel for more chapters of The Unwanted Heir. As Karl slowly recovered from his terrifying encounter with the soldiers, Amélie became even more protective, limiting their outings to only essential errands. The world outside their apartment felt increasingly perilous, a maze of suspicion and danger. Karl, though still easily startled by loud noises or sudden movements, had gained a little more confidence, even venturing small, hesitant questions about the world around them. His connection to Amélie deepened, a silent, unbreakable bond. One afternoon, Amélie was meticulously mending a tear in Karl's small trousers, her brow furrowed in concentration. Karl was quietly playing on the floor with a few wooden blocks she had found for him, occasionally murmuring to his beloved wooden bird. Suddenly, there was a sharp rap on the door. Amélie's heart leapt into her throat. Her first thought was the Gestapo, the ever-present fear of the occupation. She quickly motioned for Karl to hide under the table, which he did without question, his eyes wide with apprehension. She opened the door cautiously, revealing not soldiers, but Madame Dubois, the elderly concierge of their building. Madame Dubois was a woman of sharp eyes and even sharper wit, who saw everything and said little, but her gaze was often heavy with unspoken judgment. She held a basket of wilting vegetables, her face etched with the hardships of the war. "Amélie," she said, her voice raspy, "I brought you some scraps from the market. Thought you could use them." Amélie forced a smile, grateful for the unexpected kindness, but wary of the old woman's intense stare. "Thank you, Madame Dubois. That is very kind." As Madame Dubois stepped inside, her gaze swept across the small apartment, lingering for a moment on the edge of the blanket peeking out from under the table. Karl, despite Amélie's warning, had shifted slightly. A flicker of something, recognition, curiosity, crossed the old woman's face. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly as she took in the unusual sight. She didn't say anything, but her silence was more potent than words. "You have a guest?" Madame Dubois asked, her voice flat, her eyes now fixed on Amélie. Amélie's mind raced. She knew the concierge was a gossip, and any unusual presence could be reported to the authorities. "Just a young cousin, madame. His family. They are in the countryside, and it is safer for him here for now." She tried to keep her voice light, but she could feel the tension in her shoulders. Madame Dubois simply nodded, a knowing glint in her eyes. "Ah, a cousin, of course." She handed Amélie the basket. "Well, take care. These times, they are difficult for everyone, especially for those with secrets." Her gaze flickered to the spot where Karl was hidden, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. Then, without another word, she turned and left, closing the door softly behind her. Amélie let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Madame Dubois knew, or at least she suspected. The incident served as a stark reminder of the fragile bubble of safety Amélie had created for Karl, a bubble that could burst at any moment. The encounter with Madame Dubois left Amélie unsettled. The old woman's subtle hints and knowing glances were a constant worry, a reminder that their precarious existence was always under scrutiny. Amélie redoubled her efforts to keep Karl hidden, making sure he never ventured near the windows and only allowing him out of the apartment after dark, and then only for brief, essential trips. Karl, understanding the seriousness of the situation, became remarkably adept at remaining unseen and unheard. One rainy afternoon, as the sound of distant air raid sirens wailed, signaling another potential bombing, Amélie and Karl huddled together in the small, reinforced closet that served as their makeshift shelter. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and fear. Karl, surprisingly calm, was tracing patterns on the dusty floor with his wooden bird. Suddenly, he stopped, his small finger pointing to a faint, barely visible engraving on the bird's tail feather. "Schloss," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the distant rumble of planes. "Schloss Adler." Amélie leaned closer, straining to hear. "Schloss Adler?" she repeated, the words unfamiliar. "What does that mean, Karl?" He looked up at her, his eyes serious. "My home, big house, Schloss Adler." He then pointed to the crest on the bird's base. "My family, Papa, Mama." He paused, his small brow furrowed in concentration. And the crown. Always the crown. He made a small circle with his finger above his head, indicating a crown. Amélie's mind reeled. Schloss Adler. It sounded German. And the mention of a crown, combined with the intricate crest on the bird, stirred a vague, uneasy memory. She had seen similar crests in history books associated with old European nobility. But a crown? That implied royalty, a concept far removed from the war-torn streets of Paris. Could it be a child's fantasy, a vivid dream of a grand life before the war? Or was there something more to it? She tried to press him for more details, but Karl, overwhelmed by the approaching rumble of the planes, simply shook his head, retreating into himself. His fragmented words, though, had opened a new, unsettling door. The boy she had found abandoned in an alley, whom she thought was just another anonymous war orphan, seemed to have a hidden past, one perhaps connected to power, privilege, and a world she could barely imagine. The wooden bird, once just a comforting toy, now felt like a key to a secret history, a history that could put them both in even greater danger. The air raid sirens grew louder, but Amélie barely registered them, her mind consumed by the implications of Karl's whispered words. The Schloss Adler and crown hints plagued Amélie. The wooden bird felt like a heavy burden, a silent witness to a truth she couldn't grasp. She searched old papers for mentions of a noble family or lost royal line, but wartime censorship made it almost impossible. What little she found hinted at a forgotten principality. One chilly evening, as Karl slept, Amélie noticed a tiny, faded inscription on the bird's wing, Prince Maximilian of Eldoria. Amélie gasped, hands trembling. Prince Maximilian, a prince of Eldoria. The pieces clicked. Eldoria, a small Eastern European principality, had a royal family known for resisting the Nazis, believed to be extinguished. This small, vulnerable boy she'd found was the last known heir to a European royal line, a living symbol of a kingdom the Nazis tried to erase. The wooden bird was a dangerous clue to his identity. His German name, Karl, was likely a cover. Her heart pounded with terror and immense responsibility. This wasn't just about protecting a child. It was about protecting a legacy, a symbol of resistance. If his true identity was discovered, Karl would be a prime target. Amélie, by harboring him, risked her life and the lives of anyone helping them. The weight of this secret suffocated her. She looked at Karl, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the immense power and danger he carried. Her act of kindness had plunged her into a world of political intrigue. But looking at his innocent face, a fierce determination burned within her. She'd saved him once. She'd protect him again, no matter the cost. If you're on the edge of your seat and can't wait to discover how Amélie will protect the true identity of Prince Maximilian, make sure to subscribe to the channel for the thrilling continuation of The Unwanted Heir. Knowing Karl was Prince Maximilian of Eldoria turned Amélie's life into constant dread. Every knock, every stranger, every siren filled her with fear. The wooden bird, a comfort before, was now a symbol of danger. She hid it carefully, ensuring Karl couldn't accidentally reveal the inscription. Her already meager resources were strained. Providing for Karl meant even less for her, leaving her gaunt but resolute. She taught Karl caution, avoid eye contact, understand unspoken rules. He, in turn, matured, his playful spirit tempered by the gravity of their situation. One frigid morning, an insistent banging rattled their door, louder, more demanding than Madame Dubois. "Open up! French police!" a gruff voice commanded. Amélie's blood ran cold. She quickly pushed Karl into a small, secret compartment behind a loose wardrobe panel. "Don't make a sound, Karl," she whispered, her voice trembling. He nodded, pale but resolute, clutching his teddy bear. Amélie opened the door, forcing a calm expression. Two grim French policemen stood on her landing. "Madame Dubois," one said, "we've reports of suspicious activity here. Someone harboring a child, possibly a runaway or worse, a collaborator's child." Amélie's heart pounded. Madame Dubois. Her betrayal was clear. "Officer, I assure you, there's no one here but myself," Amélie said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I live alone." The police weren't deterred. They pushed past her, searching the apartment. They rummaged through her few things, peered under the bed, opened every cupboard. Amélie stood, breath held, gaze fixed on the wardrobe, praying Karl would stay silent and the panel would hold. The tension in the small room was suffocating. The policemen systematically searched Amélie's apartment, their deliberate movements intimidating. Amélie stood rooted, eyes on the wardrobe, her mind racing with desperate plans for Karl hidden within. She could hear his shallow breathing, a fragile counterpoint to their rummaging. One officer approached the wardrobe, hand reaching for the handle. Amélie's heart leaped. This was it. The hidden panel was almost imperceptible, but a slight shift could reveal Karl. "Officer!" Amélie exclaimed, her voice sharp with desperation. "Perhaps you'd like some coffee. It's freshly brewed. It might warm you." She gestured to the steaming pot. The officer paused, glancing at his colleague. Coffee, a rare luxury, was tempting. "We're here to do a job, madame," he grumbled, but his eyes flickered to the stove. "I understand, officer," Amélie replied, stepping closer, blocking his view of the wardrobe. "But even in these times, hospitality is important, no? A moment to warm yourselves before you continue your thorough inspection." She poured the coffee, the aroma filling the air. The tired officers hesitated. One shrugged. "A quick cup, then?" As they reluctantly took the mugs, Amélie's mind raced. Minutes at best. She needed a diversion. Her gaze fell on a framed photo of her smiling parents. "You know," she said, her voice laced with feigned sadness, "it's been so hard since my parents. They were taken, just last month, by the Germans, you see, accused of resistance. It's so difficult to be alone." A single, well-timed tear rolled down her cheek. The mention of Germans and resistance struck a chord. The French police were often caught between their people and the occupiers. The older officer, his face softening, nodded grimly. "Many suffer, madame. The war takes its toll." Amélie continued, her voice trembling with fabricated grief, painting herself as a helpless, struggling woman, too consumed by sorrow for secrets. The officers, swayed by her performance and a flicker of sympathy, saw a victim, not a suspect. They finished their coffee, muttered false condolences and left, to Amélie's immense relief, without a second glance at the wardrobe. The moment the door clicked shut, Amélie collapsed against it, legs weak. She waited a minute, listening intently, before carefully opening the wardrobe. Karl emerged, pale and trembling but unharmed. He looked at her, eyes wide with silent understanding. The desperate gambit had worked, but Amélie knew, with chilling certainty, this was only a temporary reprieve. The net was closing in, and their time in Paris was quickly running out. The police raid solidified Amélie's decision. They couldn't stay in Paris. Madame Dubois' betrayal and constant threats made escape imperative. But how, with German patrols tightening their grip? Amélie contacted Jean-Pierre, a cynical baker and resistance contact. He smuggled people and information. Meeting him in his bakery's cellar, she explained their danger, omitting Karl's royal lineage. Jean-Pierre listened, kneading dough. "There's a route, Amélie," he finally said, low. "Through the Pyrenees, perilous, only for the desperate. It will cost you everything." Amélie didn't hesitate. I have nothing left to lose, Jean-Pierre. Only him. The journey was grueling. They traveled mostly by night, hidden in a truck, then on foot through forests and icy rivers. Karl, remarkably resilient, endured the hardships, his small hand never leaving Amélie's. The wooden bird, Prince Maximilian of Eldoria, was hidden around Amélie's neck. They faced hunger, cold, and constant fear of discovery. Amélie often carried Karl when he tired. After weeks of travel, exhausted, they reached the Pyrenees, a vast, imposing wall separating France from Spain. The air was thin, the peaks formidable but promising freedom. They met a silent guide who led them through treacherous passes. One morning, after a terrifying climb, they emerged onto a high ridge. Below them, stretching into the hazy distance, was Spain, untouched by war's immediate grip. The sun broke through, casting a golden glow. Amélie felt a profound, overwhelming relief. They were safe. For now. She looked at Karl, wide-eyed at the vast expanse. He was no longer the terrified alley child. He was still small, still bore scars, but a flicker of hope shone through. Amélie knew their journey wasn't over. The war still raged, and the world remained dangerous for the last heir of a royal European line. Their path forward was uncertain, filled with challenges and sacrifices. But as she tightened her grip on his small hand, Amélie felt a quiet strength. She had rescued a lost prince, driven by kindness. Now she would dedicate her life to protecting him, ensuring the line of Eldoria, represented by this innocent child, would not be extinguished. Their future was unwritten, but they would face it together, a testament to human connection in the darkest times. If you've been moved by Amélie and Karl's incredible journey and want to witness the next chapter of their lives, make sure to subscribe to the channel and follow us for more compelling stories of survival and resilience.